Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Leslie Ann Noel, and I'm the Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact at the Taylor Center, the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking. And we do these monthly design thinking breakfasts, which really are a fun, um, a nice way of connecting with other people in the design world here at Taylor. So the format is pretty simple. I'm actually going to shut up very quickly because I'm just telling you hi from the Taylor Center. But these sessions are really led by our graduate assistant, Naisha Ford, who works with our guest to create the session for today. So all of that said, I'm immediately going to hand over to Naisha so she can introduce herself and introduce our guest. So Naisha, over to you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. This is our third DT breakfast of this school semester. If you've been here before, you know I'm Naisha Ford. I'm a graduate assistant at the Phyllis M. Taylor Center. I'm also the co-host of the DT breakfasts every Friday, every month, at the end of every month. And our guest today, so I'm going to do a brief intro for our guest today, and then I'm going to let her introduce herself as well. So the guest we have today, her name is Raja, and please, if I mess up your last name, please correct me. It's Raja Schaar, correct? Okay. And she is the program director and assistant director of product design at Drexel University's College of Media Arts and Design. She also co-chairs IDSA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. She's an industrial designer with an extensive background in museum exhibit design, who is passionate about ways design can make a positive impact, intersections with health and environment and education. So with that really brief intro, I'm going to let Raja introduce herself, and then we're going to get started for the morning.
Can you hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Design Thinking Breakfast. I'm so happy to be here with you virtually. I actually am really disappointed that I could not be there in person. This would have definitely been one of the few trips that would have been worth it, just to travel and then spend a few days. I love New Orleans. I was there maybe 2 years ago for a conference, and I not for the first time, but for like many times, like I always try to go back. And so in fact, I was meaning to have my background be in the beignets that I had the last time I was there. I just forgot to change it, but it's very, very exciting to be there. Actually, I might even make the effort to change it like while I'm talking to you all, because I was kind of bummed. I turned on my camera and I was like, no, the pictures aren't on this computer. But I'm really excited to be here. So today I am going to be talking about the work that I do as a design educator. I'm an industrial designer. I am, as Naisha said, I am the program director for product design at Drexel University. In addition to that, I also co-chair the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Council for IDSA, which is the Industrial Designer Society of America. So for those of you that are familiar with that organization or not familiar with industrial design, I'll give you a little background before I get started. But essentially, my field of design is responsible for the mass production of things that are distributed across the globe. So it could be anything from a phone, pair of glasses, cups, etc. And so we really are about the business of coming up with the best strategy and the best design attributes to put on those objects so that we can serve the most amount of people in the best way. It is a very commercially driven profession in that we are making goods for sale. However, on the education side of things, we really try to reinforce, rather than just the business connection, is how to do that in the most strategic way, in a skilled way, understanding manufacturing, understanding like product technology, but also how do we do that for the best way for people and the planet. So we often think of things like human factors, ethics, considering social impact of our work, the environmental impact of our work, and also the life cycle of the things that we produce. So students that are trained in industrial design are learning to make and manufacture things, but oftentimes we try to talk about these things in concert with what's happening in the rest of the world. So as an industrial designer, it has been a really big part of my practice is to how to use the skills that I have in deeply understanding people, being connected to the planet, and also knowing how to generate ideas for the greatest good. So that's really how I try to approach it. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my path and why I really fell in love with industrial design or technology to begin with. And then additionally, I'm going to send you all to, or we're going to go into a little activity that I've been doing with some of my students. So, and if you give me 1 second, someone just asked me for a link to this thing. So hold on, I'm gonna paste it into my chat. I apologize. But give me 1 second. Oh, I was not anticipating that. Don't you love technology? Don't you love having your everything on your phone or on your computer? So anyway, I am going to share my slides in just a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to see, were there any questions? I'm probably going to spend about 15 minutes, try to move quickly through my presentation so we can spend the remaining time in the activity. And just for one point of clarification, we're ending hard stop at 9 a.m. Central, correct, Naisha? All right, cool. So I just want to make sure. Cool, let me grab this. And I always have to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So I think I am. Everybody can see that? Yes? All right, very cool. So hi, hi, I'm Raja again. So welcome to my talk. So Cli-Fi ethics in the future, yay! So really this is a talk that deals with resilience and thinking about issues of justice and adaptation as it relates to speculative design. And as you might have intuited from the title of this thing, it's Cli-Fi is climate fiction. So we'll get into that briefly. But just to get into sort of me, I grew up in South Georgia, which is probably the one town and is most devoid of design in the conversation. I had never heard the word design. I knew about engineering, I knew about all these other things, but I did not understand that what I had always wanted to do with my life was create amazing things, really toys, which I thought were awesome, was something that was a field of thought. It was a way of training, it was a way of being. But I did learn a lot from visual culture, specifically popular culture, more specifically TV and movies. Like I learned about the world through TV and movies, like a lot of us do. I learned about other cultures, but I also learned to dream. And so my parents were nerds. And so they really raised me on a very rich diet of science fiction. My mom is a Trekkie. So I grew up watching reruns of the original Star Trek series, in addition to like every week we would watch The Next Generation together. But one of the stories that I really resonated with me in watching it and sort of seeing Nichelle Nichols on screen as Uhura was not just that it was about this sort of a traveling band of space people looking for ways to connect with other species and exploring new worlds and sort of being ambassadors of Earth. It was really this idea that there was a Black woman present on the team at a level playing field with the other members. And that resonated with me. I kind of was like, why is she the only one? the one woman, the one Black person as the token, but I wish there was more. But I didn't understand the context of when this show sort of aired in the 60s. And something that I learned later on in going to sci-fi conventions was the story that Nichelle told about how Dr. Martin Luther King was the reason that she stayed a member of the cast of this show. And that was because of the significance of her representation on screen at a time of the height of the civil rights movement, where people were fighting for liberation, recognition, equality, and demanding that they matter. We look to our television screens every week and we see you there in the future. And so there is there's an artwork that's also generated with these quote, there are Black people in the future. And that idea of just her being there meant so much to so many people. And it really gave them this aspiration of hope. And that was the reason that she stayed a member of the cast, because she was going to quit to pursue a career in musical theater because she preferred musical theater to sci-fi. Not that she didn't like the show, it was just one of those things where it was not really her jam. But because of that significance, not only did she stay a member of the cast, she also went on to work closely with NASA to try to inspire more Black kids, brown kids, and women to enter into STEM careers. And it just sort of skyrocketed from there, which is just fantastic. Another one, of course, is Star Wars. This was my dad's favorite like sci-fi trilogy at the time as I was growing up. Now it's, what do you call when it has 9 parts? Or in a full on like universe of a portfolio of movies. But like growing up, my dad really liked this idea of like, how do we understand morality? And he really liked this very clear cut, there's the dark side and there's a light side. But of course, I didn't care about that. I really cared about Leia because I thought that she was this amazing badass. And from the get-go, when they presented her in the early minutes of the film, this is thinking about New Hope. It was this damsel in distress, this, this projection of this hologram that was asking for help. But the minute you meet her, you realize that she's probably the most skilled, most strategic, and bravest of the bunch, which really for me as a young kid watching this was like, yes, a badass princess. So, for a lot of kids, this idea of representation in media is really important. And I think that what that does for me is it's fed into the way that I perceive my work. Not only the significance of my work, but also looking for inspiration for it. And it's not just looking for inspiration in role models, I'm also looking at other themes. So themes like extinction, from watching The Never-Ending Story, this idea of the nothing that's coming to suck up everything. And that was probably the first time I was probably mature enough to understand that this was an allegory for really climate change, and what we were doing to our planet, and the lack of belief, not just in like fairy tales, but the lack of belief in like what is happening around us. But of course, I was a kid of the 80s, so I got beat over the head quite a bit with climate change tales. So this is a snapshot of Fern Gully. For those of you that don't know, Fern Gully is based on these fairies who live in the rainforest, who try to save their ecosystem and habitat from the destruction of the man, who is personified as literally smoke plumes coming from this equipment that's clear cutting the forest, right? And so again, not to make anything subtle, we actually were developing this idea of superheroes, and not just Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, who I loved because I was a DC fan at the time. I am now a Marvel convert. But we had Captain Planet, right? Who in his Planeteers, and it was this super intentional, diverse band of young kids making a difference and trying to figure out how to save the earth, right? And then even looking forward into more recent movies with Pixar's WALL-E, looking at this time where we have to leave the earth because we're covered in trash. And we were waiting for sort of the robots that are left behind to clean it up so that maybe we can return. And generations and generations pass, right? We evolve along with the technology that we have, and we no longer need to come back to the world. And of course, we discovered that there is one single planet that's been able to survive, and how can we use this and communicate it to humans so they'll want to come back. But this is where I feel like all of my stuff sort of leads into this push towards climate change, and not only just climate change, but looking at climate fiction for cautionary tales about the role of what design and the products that we produce and the trash that results from that are doing to our planet, and how can we inspire our students who are thinking about these ideas to think about it more strategically, to think about it more ethically, but also to think long-term about the consequences of the things that we might be producing. And so I kind of gave a summary of industrial design before, but I feel like one of the things that makes me feel very proud to be an industrial designer is it really is about strategy and innovation. And it's not limited to the physical manufactured products. We're looking at systems and services. And I think in truth, for many of us, it really is this sort of optimistic view of how can we make a difference? How can we impact the future? And sometimes that's incremental and sometimes that's radical. But I do feel like, and at its heart, we're not out here to do harm. That said, we do quite a bit of harm. And so that's where I'm going to get into in just a second. So I want my students, and I would love for you to walk away from this thinking about design as a path, or industrial design specifically, has this sort of responsibility to think about how we can do good in the world and how we can prevent the most harm. That said, I don't think that as a profession, we can necessarily just throw it out altogether, because we live in a world that is based on not only conspicuous consumption and capitalism, which it is, but people from the time we've been here have been creators of things, and we have been makers of things, and we have been consumers of things. So it's one of those considerations that I think is really important for us to acknowledge, that if we're going to be producing things, how do we produce them in the best way possible? So looking at some of the impacts of my field in the fashion industry, transportation, and others, it's really thinking about what we are doing not only to our planet and to the species that are here, but what are the conditions that we are creating for the societies and the people that are working to produce these things, that are living amongst these things, that are being, their population, their whole entire ecosystem is being polluted based on the products that we are producing day in and day out. So you can look at waterway pollution, you can look at species extinction, you can look at working conditions, you can look at pay, right? All of these things are setting up inequities that we really need to consider because, you know, as Victor Papanek said, there are professions more harmful than product design or industrial design, but only a few. And so what we really want to think about is how it relates to people, how it's ecologically responsible, socially responsive, revolutionary, and radical. And so for me, I really believe that climate fiction as a point of inspiration can come into play, because we can be inspired by the works of those who came before us and the works that are happening now to think about what this idea of revolutionary and radical might be as we're looking to make difference in the world. So with that, I'm going to get into a little bit of overview of a couple of movies and shows and books that I would love to just sort of preface our activity with that I think will really set this up nicely. So the first one would be looking at some older books, books that have been out for a little while. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of the books that I read in college that was the first time that I really started to think about this idea of technology and ethics. And this idea of a 18-year-old woman sort of writing this novel set well before we had electricity available, that set up not only themes of bioethics, but also this inventing this idea of restarting the heart with electricity, right? So this is a prediction of what's going to be happening in the world. And this is what I consider to be one of the early kernels for me of not only radical imagination, but a cautionary tale of like how things might go wrong, right? Jules Verne, often referred to as the father of science fiction, imagine this idea of how we traverse the globe. So in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, we're talking about this imagining and inventing this idea of a submarine, something that no one had been able to do before, but within years we were using it in wars. Fahrenheit 451 really talks about this idea of society conked out on technology to the point where books become banned and knowledge is held captive, but also inventing this idea of earbuds at the time. And while if you've seen the great recent movie, it's an updated retelling of it. But at the time, earbuds weren't a thing and technology was not ubiquitous yet. And I would still say it's not ubiquitous in some ways now. If we look at like The Martian, it's a really scientific telling of how we might colonize another planet and what would happen in order to survive. Altered Carbon is about this idea of encapsulating consciousness and living forever by having your consciousness uploaded to new skins or new bodies. So it's this idea of a virtual immortality, which gives us some pause on what is real, who are we if we are not ourselves. There's other books that I really love that deal with themes of climate change as well, or post-apocalyptic themes. So you have The Hunger Games, which is a society that is set in the United States, which has collapsed, and we have broken into new colonies, and each one has their own industrial sort of need. Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler is also one that's about this idea of surviving global warming, looking at surviving totalitarian governments, looking at corruption, looking at devastation, looking at the effects of climate change, of fire, but also thinking about this idea of survival. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale not only sets up a post-apocalyptic world, where it's not even apocalyptic, it's just more dystopian, but we've given way to a more theocratic and authoritarian regime, which has really set back women and people who can bear children as subjective to the rest of society, as the only valuable for their fertility, and then enslaving them so that they could essentially keep the population going. So we're dealing with things of not only infertility, but also what happens when a theocratic dogma sort of enters into our government and then takes over. And then not only that, what sort of power imbalances are established there. N.K. Jemison's book, The City We Became, which just came out like last year. I don't know if you all have had a chance to read it. It's literally, it parallels so similarly what we're in now in terms of what would be happening after a pandemic, right? What sort of world would be established? What sort of themes, what sort of beliefs, what sort of intersections of society, how would we interact with each other? How would we separate from each other? The Stand, also about climate change. The Giver, it's about a utopia where someone thinks about, how did we get to where we are today, and looking back at history to understand sort of what came before. And then getting into the things that I love, which is moving pictures. I also like books, but I really like TV and movies. There's a number of TVs and TV shows and movies that have inspired technology today. AR and VR in Black Panther. You can look at the communicator in Star Trek, thinking about Minority Report and how it's inspired gesture-based technology. Then there's more. There's this idea of the Expanse, which is based on the book series or the Leviathan Weeks, which deals with themes of colonization, technology access, constructs of race, language, exploration. And if you haven't watched it, it's on Amazon Prime. It is exceptional. I love it so much. If you have HBO, I strongly recommend Lovecraft Country, which really not only thinks about themes that relate to sort of the Black American experience in the United States, but also dares to give us images of how we might dream and how we might think about getting our ways out of it. And one of my favorite characters is Hippolyta, but not only her, but her daughter, who dreams of this idea of like a new character who travels space and explores new worlds. So inspiring young girls and young Black girls and young brown girls to dream about a role in society where they are creating new worlds is like super, super important to me. But then the Omniscient, if you haven't seen, some of the captions are wrong on here. Omniscient, if you haven't seen, also deals with this idea of drone technologies in Brazil, where we have a utopic society where everyone is surveilled 24/7. And then, of course, there is the oil crisis inspired movies from Mad Max. If you haven't seen those, there's the newer one with Fury Road with Charlize Theron. But the original one came about inspired by some of the things that were happening in the United States at the time, specifically thinking about themes like oil, fighting over fuel, what becomes important, what happens if we don't have oil, how does society shut down, how does sort of anarchy take over, and what sort of things emerge there. So things like water become super important. Kevin Costner's, this is Kevin Costner, I forget his last name, but it's the water world. We're really thinking about this idea of climate change and global warming. And this is, again, I hit you over the head kind of movie where the entire planet is flooded, our ice caps have melted, and land is valuable. And the thing that becomes the most important is literally jars of dirt. And the cyberpunk trilogy, The Matrix, we're really also thinking about this idea of not only technology taking over, but also our ability to want to acknowledge what reality is, right? So Neo has to take the red pill or the blue pill. And I think that we're in a moment now where we are still a lot of in denial about what we are doing in terms of the harms that we're giving to the planet. You can see some of those things happening in the fallout of our current pandemic as people fight for a former normal that is not necessarily attainable right now. And we're so hesitant to just accept what is true and what is real. And then The Handmaid's Tale, which I brought up before, is also a TV series on Hulu, which again is this idea of like what happens in the present day. But this was set in 1985. And some of the things that I feel like are really, for me, impactful when I look at science fiction is what the authors of it, what the creators of it were able to imagine, that oftentimes you hear people say things like, I never could have imagined that that would have happened. You know, there's always this surprise, this shock at the treatment of people, at the devastation of things, of hearing a statistic that just seems so unbelievable, but yet you could have imagined it all along. So what I really want my students to understand is that they need to be using their radical imaginations to also posit how the things that they are creating are going to shape and influence society, but also what is that future society that they are creating things for, right? So not to simplify it, but design really is complex. But a lot of times we think about it in terms of the styling of things. Like if you ask most people what design is, they're going to say that it's about the way things look. But if you are a designer, you know that it really is about wrestling with a lot of issues that deal with race, that deal with society, that deal with ability, that deal with history, that deal with technology, materials, all these things, right? And what I would love to do is make that known to more people, the complexity of what we deal with. But here's a snapshot of what I have chosen to focus on as a designer. What my three simple things are the environment, education, and equity. And that comes from my experience as being a Black woman growing up in the United States. It has to do with my education around climate change, global warming, et cetera, as a kid of the 80s and the 90s. But it also has to do with this idea of how do we influence other people to think critically about their role in the world. So I focus a lot on these three themes. That's what, and I'll come back to that after we do our activity, to sort of show you a little bit about how I'm approaching it through my research. But these themes dealing with climate change, environmental justice, thinking about bio-inspired design or biomimicry, circularity, dystopia, and ecotopias are things that I really want to introduce more to our overall design curriculum. And it's something that I've been taking very careful effort to introduce into mine for the last 10 years. The way that STEAM education as an interdisciplinary act of thinking about how we learn and how we inspire the things that are created in the world from an artistic standpoint, from a technological standpoint, something that's founded in science, that you're layering over many different disciplines to understand and move things forward, as opposed to thinking of the silo-wise ways that we teach a lot of these different disciplines. But reflected with that should be critical pedagogies that also are having our students think about how what they're learning can change their circumstances and the circumstances of others for the good, but also to question what they're learning, so they're not subject to believing things that are untrue or that are harmful, and to be able to recognize those things, right? So, and it is about exposing and exposure to all these different powerful pathways that they can make changes in. So for me, discovering design, I felt like I discovered a superpower, because suddenly I was able to articulate my visions of the future, like with my hands and with the things that I made. And, you know, to be able to like absorb ideas about what was possible and to posit them and put them out in the world as real things. And I think that if we are not thinking about this idea of access to power through education, then we don't expose students to all these different ways that they might be able to take their interdisciplinary ways of being from their lived experiences and move those forward. That's going to be, we're always going to have the same power structures that we have now, which is usually white men in power, people with money in power, capitalism ruling the day, the planet being destroyed, us being unwilling to learn our lessons and move forward. And with that, I also think that our education alongside design and always should really be decolonized and really privilege the thoughts, the knowledge and the histories of all the different cultures globally that work with it. So wherever we are, we should be meeting people where they are. We should be learning from, and we should really be valuing the lived history of all people. And I do think that a lot of times when we read about some of these schools of thought in education, we're reading from the lens of someone who didn't necessarily live through that. And it's interpreted from the lens of white men. And we can look at that in history books, but it also shows up in the field of industrial design as well, as we look at some of the textbooks, and there's not a whole bunch, but we look at some of the textbooks that are written and the ways of doing design that sometimes can be harmful to the people that we work with. And so with that, themes of equity are also really prevalent in the work that I think about, which thinking about the power and agency, how we are impacting with racial justice, gender equity, how we can really help build more equity around health, and then hopefully move towards like this liberation and also a utopia for all. And I know that those themes seem like very wide reaching, but I do think that the only way to get there is to start somewhere. And so I have the power as a design professor to work within my curriculum and work within my research and to sort of talk about some of these themes. But it is one of the things where the students are very comfortable and very safe and making incremental changes on things. So what is the state of it now? If I change it 5%, it'll be a little bit better, right? And we just sort of move forward, and that's considered progress. And so what I think is we need to like stop what we're doing and rethink everything. And I really felt like 2020 was the year that we were all going to embrace this idea, but that didn't happen. But so one of the ways that I do this, and I'm going to transition right now to my next, to the activity that we're going to do, is through this game that we play. Actually, I'm going to escape. If I stop my screen, sure, sorry. I'm going to share a new screen. Is this game that I've been playing for the last, I guess, 9 months. And I believe that Leslie, you came to this workshop. It was which was like Design Futures LA. Did you come to that one? It was like the Fathomers and Afro Rhythms of the Future. Were you able to come to that one?
Is that Lonnie's workshop?
Yes. Yeah. Did you come to that one? Yay. So
yes.
I adapted this game for my class, and it was along with themes of climate fiction. So if you bear with me, I have to figure out how to find my browser. My screen, my PowerPoint is too big. I think I just shut down my PowerPoint. So hopefully I can pull it back up because I did have more slides to share. So I'm going to share this new screen, which is our game that we're going to play in just a second. So give me 1 second. So I'm going to share a Miro board. Hopefully you guys will participate. I haven't seen the chat, so I'm going to pull that up so I can follow along. It is interactive. So this is the part where you talk and I do less talking. I also want to excuse myself because I am a terrible typist, but I'm going to be typing notes based on what you say. And so I apologize if I misspell words, but hopefully you will bear with me and it will be fine. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share the screen. Let's see. And I do want to find the chat window, and that's something I haven't been able to find. I had too many windows open. So let me find that chat and pull that out. All right, cool. So and in this portion of my workshop, what I want to do is say that you all can just shout out too. You do not have to use the chat. I'm going to be trying to look at the chat, listen to you, and I'm going to be typing words, all right? So yay, so let's go through it. So I'm going to share my screen, which is this Miro board, and we're going to watch a really quick video. And then after we do that, we're going to start the game. So the video is really introduction. So I'm going to walk you through how the game is played really briefly. So give me 1 second. I'm going to come over here. Oh, hi, Aisha, there you are. All right, so this is a game that's a world building game that is based on Lonnie Brooks and the Fathomers Afro Rhythms of the Future game. It is a brainstorming game, which is so fun. So we're going to do it. I'm going to play this little video, which is going to get you hyped on it, right? But this is sort of how I would introduce it to my students. So this is what we would do as a brainstorming activity, as students are starting to do speculative work around climate solutions. So my students participating in a class called Climates, I don't even remember, it's like Design, Disaster, and the Environment. But the whole point of it was to come up with speculative ideas for how we could address climate change. So to push them beyond incremental to more radical things, we played this game and it was fun. And it's really quick. We're going to come up with so many ideas in such a fast way. But we're really trying to not only come up with ideas, we're also trying to position them in a world that has tensions that are different from our own. And so it's going to be evident in just a second. So I'm going to play this video. I'm going to zoom in here. And hopefully when I do the full screen of it, it will be full screen for you.
We all have agency over what the future can bring. Each of us individually can shape not only our personal future, but the future that we all live in. And the object of tonight is to get you to imagine. We want to get you to get out of the frame of reference of what you think your future might be and get as creative as possible. And we're going to see what we can build using that imagination and speculative thought. And we might come up with some cool stuff. So there are people who have tension cards. These tension cards are going to establish the parameters of our universe, and we're going to choose 2 cards. Let me see, raise your hand if you have a tension card. All right, all the way back there.
More or less Black feminist leadership.
More or less Black feminist leadership. Who else has a tension card?
More or less social justice.
More or less social justice. So now that we have the parameters of our universe, we have created 4 multiverses that we can live in, all along the spectrum of those 2 choices. So now you guys in your chairs, you have inspiration cards. All right, let me see. What is your inspiration card?
Oh, I have fashion.
Okay, fashion. I like this one. I like fashion. What would be an article of fashion that would give you more Black feminist leadership and more social justice? Yes.
I was just thinking about the notion of the invisibility cloak, but also like to have it be reversed. Like it can make you invisible, but it can also make you more visible, amplifying like what you normally.
So an amplification cloak. Go. A bodysuit. What does this bodysuit do?
Protects you from any kind of harm.
How about a bodysuit that repels emotional damage?
Oh.
Oh shit. Okay, here we go, y'all. Let's go. Let's go. So we have a bodysuit that when anything emotional tries to come and get you, it repels it. How could it be dystopian?
Dictators could use it.
How so?
They're not feeling emotional damage and there's no consequence to society. So it feels like it could be a very negative thing to have a suit.
Right. So that could be dystopian. Okay, I need another inspiration, another object.
Inspiration, queer liberation.
Queer liberation. Object. Who has an object? Object. Here. Buttons.
You can press the button to change your gender.
A gender shifting button. Who's with that?
Yeah.
The button should be more like, you're more on the spectrum, it's more fluid.
Yeah,
I think we're like post-binary.
It's not binary.
So what if the button is just like, it just regulates you through your queer liberation? It's a dial. It's not a button, it's a dial, right?
Research has shown that we can create alternative memories that heal trauma. And how do we heal the trauma of 400 years of oppression? How do we heal any personal trauma that we've had individually, collectively? And how do we create alternative memories of the future that pull us in and create resiliency for everybody? So we see this game as potentially available in schools, colleges. I played it with my students.
I like playing it with students also because, especially your students of your Afrofuturism course, they want to be creating their own cards and their own ideas that they're putting into the game. So it's not just using what we've given them, but adding to it.
Let it become a democracy of the future for everyone, available to everyone.
All right, and for those of you that are sci-fi nerds, anybody know who Ahmed Best is? Anybody? Anyone? I don't know. I'm looking at the chat. Because when I showed it to my students, the first thing I heard was Jar Jar Binks. That's Jar Jar Binks, just so you guys know, which is really cool. So he has an Afrofuturist podcast. It's great. So getting into the game. So you know, I went to this workshop last year and I was super inspired by the way that this really generated many ideas, not only about the multiverse, but then thinking about how we would speculate on objects that would be in there. So what I've done is I don't have the cards because they're still working on them, but it's great. I adapted based on what I did in the interactive workshop that I attended, this version on Miro. So I'm going to be sharing the link to this at the end of my talk so everyone will have it. So feel free to copy it. I am at the end of the workshop that I attended, he was like, feel free to adapt it and let me know how you're adapting it. So this is what I've done. So I've done it based on this idea of climate futures. We use it as an analysis tool as well as a world building tool. So as an analysis tool, I actually have my students watch a series of disaster movies, specifically climate fiction movies, which are all, you can see a list here if you ever want to look at those. Thinking about this idea of what climate futures are, thinking about Afrofutures specifically related to that, thinking about ideas related to speculative design and design fiction. So referencing the work of Julian Bleecker as well. So students sort of have a list of resources and things, and then they watch a climate fiction movie and then do an analysis. And the analysis is establishing what are the tensions present in these films or this book, and mostly films because I like movies. And then what are the significance of some of the objects there and what are they inspired by? And so the students sort of use this worksheet as a way to take notes on the movie, right? So what they're doing is establishing what the major tensions of it are, and then also establishing where the world might exist within those tensions. And so if we're looking at a movie like Waterworld, we're talking about maximum climate devastation, you know, and minimal access to resources, or right? And then what are some of the objects that play there? There's the jar of dirt, there's boats, right? There are these objects that also are inspired by the need to transport or need to live. So the boat becomes a house. The house becomes a city, right? It's not just a boat as a thing that you just sort of as a recreational vehicle. And so they're using it to take notes, but then we also turn around and we use it again as a brainstorming tool. So what we can see here, I'm going to navigate. I'm sorry, it's so jumpy when I navigate. Close your eyes if you get nauseous. I feel like this is a Prezi. So like we've done it to sort of navigate and to think about things. So what we're going to do is this: we're going to be taking a world. We're going to be brainstorming what are two tensions we want to have. We're going to be thinking about where the world exists between those two tensions. And then we're going to define what those are. I take notes. And then we start to think about what are some things that were inspired by those, right? So if it's an object of fashion and students came up with automated kitchen, what would we do with that? And so these are just things that would come up with. So this is the same way you would lead any sort of brainstorming activity where people are just generating ideas quickly, but now we're contextualizing them as in a world that is not our own, but that we are defining together. So we're going to do that. I'm going to scroll over to our board, which is over here. Oh my gosh. Oh, keep going. Oh goodness. Come on, Roger. You got it. Don't freeze. It's almost there. It's almost there. All right, here. So this is a blank one for us. So let's go to ours. So I'm leaving this one up here as an example for you all. I'm going to delete this. And now what you're going to do is you're going to drive me to what we are going to be establishing as our two tensions. So the pink cards here are some of the tensions that I have already populated. Again, I usually leave blank ones so the students just fill in whatever they want as it relates to the themes that they're working on, but we do have a few here. So what I would love to see in the chat is proposals for what two tensions we will be using for our version of this game, or you can shout out. The way that I do it is the first to say something, there's the ones that go in the thing to make it quick for this game. If we were doing it in class, I would have like a poll or something. So okay, we got more or less income inequality. So I got that one. All right, that's tension number one. What's tension number two?
Someone said privacy and public health.
All right, I need a second for either privacy or public health.
Public health.
Okay, public health done. All right, so this is our world. We have income inequality and public health as our two tensions. Now, what we need to do is define what do we mean when we say public health and what do we mean when we say privacy. And that's the audience's role to participate here in helping us define that. If you can type it in the chat, shout it out. Again, don't get mad at me. I'm very slow typist and I misspell things, but I'm going to do my best. That's what I do. So I'm happy to copy and paste from the chat, or just you can just say it out. So what does public health look like? Let's start with that one.
Definitely healthcare. Like,
I see free healthcare in the chat.
Okay, so we got free healthcare. What's healthcare?
I also see clean water everywhere.
Okay. Okay, we have preventative measures.
Anti-racism.
Okay, hold on, I'm just gonna type. Okay, I was trying to copy and paste, it's not working. So anti-racism. Okay, we have, so healthcare means physical and mental health.
Leslie says no fear of the bill when going to see a healthcare specialist.
Ooh, no fear of the bill. That is, I feel like for me, that is so critical. I'm always like, oh, is my copay gonna cover this? Everyone, I see that one in there too. Perks for everyone.
Clean air came up.
Elderly care, clean air, right?
Free therapy.
And that really relates back to this idea of mental health too, as well. And I feel like all these things are mental and physical health can be part of it. Like the bill, like now knowing that you're not gonna have a shocker of a bill from a mental health standpoint can really help as well. Timely healthcare, right? What is timely healthcare?
Oh, they said can get it when you need it.
Okay. Healthcare. Preventative. No food deserts. I was going to put no food desserts, which is the opposite, right? Okay, elimination of health disparities. All right, I'm going to cut this one off for right now because I want to get into defining privacy. What does it say? Paying doctors to keep people healthy and not pay them when sick. The maintaining health, and okay, we got solidarity up there too. All right, cool. Maintaining health. And again, I apologize if I have misspellings. That's it. I'm admitting my flaws. So here we go. Let's talk about privacy. That was going to be the other decision number one, correct? Or income inequality, not privacy. Let's talk about what is income equality or what is income inequality, whichever one you want to say. Got removal of language barriers. Hold on. Oh, hold on. Is that end of the public health or is that one for this one? Money and access of different privileges. Okay, thanks for privileges, but you spelled it correctly. Thank you. Look at yours. Privileges. Gender equity. What else we got? No more billionaires. And but what's the currency? Are we talking about USD? You know, all right. No more internships. Yes. Okay. This has been my thing since I was an intern. No more unpaid internships.
Someone said
caps. I got paid.
Someone said caps on CEO salaries.
Caps on CEO salaries.
Basic universal income or universal basic income.
Okay, I'm spelling it wrong. Universal.
Yeah, it's universal basic income.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
I missed something. So
they actually floating with that idea, so we don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So no student loan debt.
Yep. No private land or property. A global currency. No more economic hierarchy.
Whoa.
I see something about affordable education, or I don't know if that was a comment or just a, or education for all. Okay.
Please. All right. So I'm going to cut this off right now just because, I can't type that fast. All right. So, whoa, my gosh. Okay. Redefining skill sets and experiences for professional opportunities. See if I can copy and paste this. It was not letting me copy and paste before. So let me see if it's letting me do it now. There we go. I did. I was able to do it. Yay. I hope I didn't miss anything critical here. But okay, so we're going to move on. So now we know what equality and income inequality looks like. We know what public health looks like, but where is our world? Are we thinking utopic or dystopic? By the way, I love dystopic because there's so many problems to solve, but utopic is awfully fun. It's fine. We can be in the middle as well. So here's our world. I'm going to move our world based on the most possible or least possible income inequality and the most possible and least possible public health. So what I would love for you to do is help me with giving me numbers in the chat for income inequality. 0 being the no income equality, and the maximum income equality would be number 5. So this is your opportunity to help us define our multiverse. Let's see.
We're getting a lot of different things.
Okay, we go. Okay, but we have some low numbers here. 1.5, 1.5, 2, 1. Okay, we got a 5. Oh my gosh, people. Okay. So what if we did this? If you are, I need more contributions. We're between either going to go 1 or we're going to go 5. So the next 5 people to post in here between either 1 or 5. Those are the only ones you have are going to be it. I see. Ari, you can't do 2.
1, 5.
So 1, 1, 5, 1. Okay, 1. We're doing 1. So we're going to have very little income equality, which is kind of like what we already have, right? Okay, so we should be comfortable here. Public health, how much do we want to have? Okay, so let's see, we got 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and slide it over here to the 4.5-ish for this. So we established our world. We have no income equality, but we have almost maximum public health. So now we're gonna pick just randomly an inspiration and an object. So you can pick any of these things, any one of these things. So let's start with inspiration. The first one that goes in the chat, I'm gonna pick, or the first one that gets shouted out. We're gonna take an inspiration card and an object, and we're just gonna spitball.
Raja, I do want to be cognizant of time. We have 4 minutes until 9 o'clock.
Okay, well, let's do it. It can happen fast. All right, we got elections. I got that. All right, so I'm gonna go over here. Boom, elections. What's gonna be our object? Wow, sorry, went too far. Pick an object. Fashion, done. All right, so let's talk about elections and fashion in a world where we have maximum public health and no income equality. What would an object of fashion with those elections in this world look like? Again, this is where I just type. You all can type in the chat your ideas, or you can just shout them out.
Someone said vote by t-shirt color.
Oh, I want it. Okay, got it. What else would be an object of fashion in elections in a world where we have maximum public health access, but no income equality? There are no wrong answers.
Someone said in the chat, representation / protest through clothing. Votes are driven by collective blood pressure measured by wearable device.
Oh, okay, I got it. Okay, I got it.
Another person said, you vote by your actual quote unquote way of being in the world through your mental, physiological, and physiological measures.
All right. Let's take, if there's one more, I'll take it, and then we'll wrap up because we have 2 minutes. But okay, so I just want to say we've already gotten in the last 3 minutes some fairly radical ideas of ways to think about this, ways to think about objects that might exist in a world that's not our own, future or not, dystopic or not, based on our own or not. But what the point is it's really hard to imagine these new scenarios without the constraints of design that we might need normally. And normally we reach those things by looking at our current present day, we look at stats, we look at literature, we talk to people. But when you can't talk to people, how do you imagine and push forward and think about new circumstances that are really going to make things different, right? And those things can be really aspirational and that they are inspiring and cool, like what we see in a lot of like our science fiction and superhero movies. But it also needs to resonate with what it could do that could be harmful. And it really should bear the question, just because we can, ought we? And then give us pause onto what we might create and how we might create things better. Let me stop my thing there so we can speed down. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the game. And the game is, for me, was a really great way to break my interdisciplinary engineering students who seemed to be stuck a lot of the time on like coming up with like these new and novel ideas. They would also always want to be like, well, if we want to prevent destruction and flooding, we just need to update the levees. And which is really, it's a great, maybe we should be doing that right now, right? Those are things we can be doing in the immediate future, but how do we think more long-term? And that's why, for me, using climate fiction or using sci-fi as just a discourse around society, it allows people to imagine visually, but also like physically what it looks like. What are the power structures? What are the political will at that point in time in this new multiverse? You know, who are the people? What are the different problems that there are and opportunities that are present in their world, and how might they inspire us to think in our present day about how we design? And speculative design is really fun. Oftentimes we come up with ideas that don't necessarily need to be made, but really just need to be talked about. And I think that's okay too. For other students, they really want to think about things that could be made, and pushing forward with technology are probably 2 years out, 2, 4, 10 years out. So it's not always something that's going to be really hard for them to accomplish, but it is a really fun way to just have design discourse around some really tough ideas in a way that students understand via media, which is something that I understand deeply, and I'm hoping that you all do too. But I'm all done. I don't know if we just want to close the meeting or if we have time for Q&A, but I'm here for a few more minutes, and that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Raja. This was really fun. I wish we could have played the game for even longer.
Sorry.
I just want to be cognizant of time. So I have posted Raja's LinkedIn in the chat if you want to connect with her on LinkedIn. I also posted the Taylor website if you want to sign up for our newsletter to know about upcoming events. I can also stay on for a little bit longer. So yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them. I did take down some questions that were said.
Oh, sorry, yes. I gotta give you. Or do you have it? I can share it.
Okay. But yeah, I did take down some questions. If I can read those out if those people are still here. But I know when you were first talking, Raja, Mark had a question. He said, is industrial design an umbrella term? I'm wondering if technological design is the same or overlaps with industrial design, or perhaps under the umbrella of industrial design.
I would say technological design probably falls under the umbrella of industrial design, but it also bridges between engineering fields, right? When you're thinking about electrical engineering and computer engineering and human computer interaction and all those other ways of creating and generating technology. I feel like the industrial design doesn't always necessitate technology to be included. A lot of the things that we do can be analog from a fork or spoon. That said, the definition of technology is just things that people make that are tools. So a spoon is a technology, but if you're talking about technological design from the standpoint of things that are driven by computers and microchips that have some sort of code in order to work or function that are powered by electricity, then industrial designers do dabble and do a lot with it because we design a lot of the devices that house those technologies, but our field does not have to be technology driven. We also use technologies to do design and to communicate our ideas and to come up and to manufacture the products that we use, but that is not the requirement. So I would say that industrial design has some technological design in it, but it is not a given that technological design is in industrial design. However, research, human-centeredness, iteration, prototyping, and testing are hallmarks of what we do, right? And we can do that in technology, we can do that in systems, we can do that in service, we can do that in products, but those are the things that are the more important things that define industrial design. And also I would say for me, because there's always an ongoing debate of what industrial design is, it really is coming up with the design that can be generated to be disseminated to more people. So whether you want to call it mass manufacturing, mass production, mass distribution, it is sort of coming up with an archetype of what could be and then making multiples of them. So if that's a curriculum, right, would you really call it curriculum design, but it becomes like this sort of like, this is what you're going to start with and we're going to send it out. So that could be the cup, right? I'm going to make 1 million of these cups and send them around the world. It could be coming up with an app, right? And so UX design or user experience design really came out of industrial design because it was about creating this one thing that a lot of people could use and making it in the best way possible with the best flexibility for the right price point, for the right amount of functionality, et cetera, and looking at also the styling, the interface of the product object system. And sometimes it deals with a host of things that come together.
I did copy down the mural board link. So if anyone wants to go on the Taylor website after this, maybe in like the next week, it will be posted on there. But yeah, if anybody has any additional questions, I think Raja, you said you still have a few minutes. If anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free.
Or just comments or anything that if you wanted to share something that you've done that's really cool that I should know about, because I'll turn it into a project for my students.
I had a
Roger, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna comment more. I see more, like I'm seeing like makerspace and everything pop up. I'm seeing more consumer based or consumer needs are really driving the design process to say making things more affordable, making things more accessible to the private sector, to the private sector more to commercial. Because commercial, it seemed like, okay, you need designs because things is being innovated, but you're now seeing the more private sector or consumer sector now getting involved with it. And that's what I'm saying now, exactly with the design process, because you're seeing more people getting involved and you're seeing more innovations coming out, tailoring towards the consumer base.
Yeah, so I would say like consumer driven design is really what industrial design is. But when I see with a lot of the maker spaces and a lot of people who are sort of creating their own ventures around product ideas and craft and all these things, is really sort of taking control away from like these larger corporations and really generating smaller runs of things that are more customized to people that are not only creating it, but also the communities that they're selling it to. And so you don't necessarily have to have so much stuff for everyone. It's really much more specific to a greater niche audience. But I do think that from an accessibility standpoint, the maker spaces have been really great to show the tools for making. I would encourage them to also have some sort of critical pedagogy or curriculum that has the critical thought of what is the best way to go about doing this from an efficiency standpoint, from a safety standpoint, but also looking at product lifecycle use and utility as well. And I think that that is simple enough to disseminate. I teach at a university, but I do believe that universities are gatekeepers to the field that I am in. And there's a lot of instruction and learning that can happen through conversations around the making of things. So I do like the idea of people generating their own incomes and coming up with their own ideas and putting them out there and making money out of it. Because at the end of the day, we all have to pay our rent.
Right, and Roger, I want to say this before going. I understand exactly what you're saying, because definitely safety and everything is a priority, but it's just interesting to see the interesting concept people are coming up with, or what they write.
Yeah,
what they imagine.
You don't have to worry about someone funding it. If you can figure out how to make it and make it at the scale that you can either fund it on your own or get crowdsourcing or get donated materials or work and collaborate with other people, then suddenly ideas can get out into the world much faster, and things that are important and powerful and needed don't have to go through the rigor of going through a boardroom, right? Should I make this or should I not make it? Would it be better in red or blue? And things can happen much more quickly. So you can put ideas out, get feedback really fast. So no, I really like the agency that makerspaces are giving to communities in general, and also the skills that can transfer into the workforce. That's the other really fun thing about a lot of the ways that makerspaces are doing, is they're training people on things that they could really make money off of if their venture doesn't work out, or that can help to fund their venture.
Okay, Raja, and then it looks like we have a question in the chat as well. So Jimmy asked, what tools do you use in the assessment part of design to make sure we are not compounding problems of race, gender, class, etc. in design? I say that because a lot of times design thinking asks designers to do ethnographic interviews without teaching ethnography well, resulting, in my opinion, bastardized data sets in order to launch into the other parts of the design process.
Yes. So when we teach human-centered design, but one of the ways that we really do talk about it is from the standpoint of sort of equity, inclusion, accessibility. The other thing is I have created, and I can maybe share in the chat if I can find the link to it, or maybe I share it with Naisha, I've created like an ethical framework, an ethical analysis framework over the past year with one of my colleagues, Chris Baiza. And we're really trying to look at this idea of consequentialism, deontological ethics, and virtue ethics, and how we approach things, and looking at all those different layers from race, gender, trauma, impact, et cetera, to figure out how students might assess existing products that exist and how those might do things, but also to think about how they are considering their own approach to design. And so as part of that, students actually are talking to people about their definitions of good and harm. We've prototyped this over the past 6 months. And it's really worked out to really generate some rich discussion on what people feel is valuable, and having those conversations before you start talking to them about design ideas is probably one of the most critical things that has been helpful for them in entering into conversations that verge on ethnography, where you're actually getting into working with folks. I know there are well-established theories and frameworks for design in co-creation and co-design that have been based in community-based and collaborative works in art and education and social work that have existed for a long time. So I would strongly encourage that you look at those approaches as well, because when we think about the idea of what we're really trying to get at with your question is, where are power structures reinforced from a designer coming in with their skills and wanting to do something for you, versus really having a conversation about what's needed in your community, in your world, in your life, and then co-authoring the solutions together, or is the better way to go about it. When you think about that from a school standpoint, easy to do. Out in the real world,
yeah, can you please share those resources you spoke about? Because what I'm finding is that, you know, it's very Western educated, industrialized, developed nation people going out, and I'm one of them. And I've heard this acronym WEIRD, which is actually Western educated, industrialized, rich, developed nation. And, you know, socioeconomically more mobile, and then trying to solve problems for people who are not in that category. And you can see how something like even gender, you know, me being, you know, a heterosexual man, can be compounded. I can compound a problem inadvertently if I wasn't more aware of my biases.
And that's why I think more people need to be educated in design, because we do that, or this practice, and I was educated in this practice of like, oh, you're a design firm, you go out, right? Is because there's not a lot of trained people who can do what we do. It's a very small field that no one knows about, because what the heck is industrial design? Like, it doesn't mean anything. If I say that to someone who's not an industrial designer, it's just like, you design factories. There's literally a mug that says I design factories, right? People make it, it's a joke. So I think you can look at the resources. There's tons. In fact, if you look on, I'm sure the Taylor Center's website, there's tons of resources, because Leslie Noel is the queen of that. So definitely look there. And I can also share, if Naisha doesn't have plenty of them already, with Naisha, some that I've used. But I think the real solution to that is not necessarily stay in your own lane, but there's two ways: diversifying your design team so that your team reflects the people that you're working with, or maybe it's none of your business. Maybe you don't need to be going over there, and maybe those people need to be doing their own thing. And how do you train them how to do that so they can work for themselves? It's the whole teach a man to fish, blah, blah, blah thing. But that is, I think that is the way forward. I think that until we have a critical mass of designers and design and ethically trained design thinkers, whatever that means, right? Socially invested design thinkers, environmentally invested design thinkers who are aware of their own privilege and back off when needed, then we're going to have to train our current designers to be able to do that ethically. But the real way forward is everyone creates for themselves when they need to, and we have less of this waste. We have more personalized things. We have things that are really wanted and needed in the world. And then also there's the authorship and the agency and the empowerment that comes in this creating ideas and putting them out there. So that's my real thing. But yes, there are resources for how to do it better for now, if you are forced to be in a situation where you are not you don't share the lived experiences of your audience. I do community-based work. So I work with Latinx youth in North Philly. I'm not Latinx, but I am brown. And I work with someone who is. So that really, I really give him sort of like the power in sort of helping generate more conversation. That said, I like kids and we like hanging out, right? And we all love nature and we all love technology. So that's a fun project for me. But I'm working alongside someone who, you know, speaks Spanish, resonates with the kids. We're partnering with an environmental education center and an English language learning center that focuses on Spanish first language speakers. So that together means that the team that's working there like respects that relationship, but also we have team members that are present. I also work with Black girls in West Philadelphia to teach technology, wearable technology through dance and coding. Which is really fantastic. I even feel like an outsider because I'm not from West Philly, but I did grow up as a young Black girl who loved to dance with her sister in the living room, right? So these are, and I went to dance class. So I resonate on so many things, but even then working with that, I work with a community center that is based there at the Dornsife Center with people who helped establish those programs that were co-created with the community. The community wanted dance classes. The community wanted more technology classes. The community wanted more of this, right? And so now we have these young girls doing, but now we have our older community members who are in their 80s that are taking the movement classes. They're like, when are we gonna be able to steam through dance and make wearable technology, right? And when it's asked for, that's when we can work with it. And then we bridge that out to the middle school. But again, it was something that some observed, they cared about. We worked with them to develop and customize our approach to that curriculum so it can be as respectful as possible. So even if you are of a community, doesn't mean that you necessarily have free reign to start designing with people. You really do have to go about all of these practices like intentionally and ethically to be the better designer.
Okay, so we are a little bit over time now. I did see some more like questions or comments, so I'm just gonna shoot that to Raja after this in an email, and I'll make sure to post that on our Taylor website.
I have a list of books. I had a whole, I closed the slideshow trying to find the Miro board. I had a whole list of books that were actually design related, not just the sci-fi books. And I'm sorry about that, but I'll send that to you too, Naisha.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much. This was super interactive and really, really interesting. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great morning.
Thank you.